Hey guys, Taylor here. Welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to talk about carburetors. We're going to be talking about dual 38 Mikunis that come factory on Yamaha Superjet. Okay, so in 2006, the EPA came out with a new rule that we couldn't have T-handles on the carbs, so they put brass plugs in there. This makes it very difficult for tuning. So we're going to show you today how to remove those plugs, how to remove the choke plates to let a little more air flow, put aftermarket air filters and stacks on your carbs, and set them up so they just run properly, so your ski starts properly. Here's the tools required for the job. You want a little hammer, crescent wrench, set of dikes, and a 12 mil and a 10 mil socket, a set of easy outs, and a drill. Okay, so step number one, carburetors are off the ski, straight off the ski onto the bench. We're going to separate the carbs, just pulling the fuel line. And we're going to start by removing the screw on the choke plate. We're going to take this nut off. This one here has a little plastic clip on it. This is where you're going to use your dikes. You put it in here and pop this guy off. This stuff's all going in the trash, so don't feel bad that you mess it up. This carburetor here, we're going to remove this nut. And all this linkage just comes off. It's going to all go in the trash. Now we're going to remove the screws out of the choke plate. And the choke plate comes out. So now I have the choke plates out, but I can feel there's a little bit of this screw left coming through the shaft here. This needs to be flushed in order to pull it through the carburetor. So I'm going to take it in the back and I'm going to grind this down just a little bit. So to take down the back of the screw that's coming through the choke shaft, I'm going to use a die grinder with a little bit on it. You could use a file or whatever tool you have to just grind it down. It's just standard steel, so not a big deal. So I'm sure you're wondering about getting dust and debris in your carburetor. Carburetors need to be clean. Don't worry, at the end of this, we're going to go through the whole carburetor with carb cleaner and clean everything out. Still have a little bit sticking up. I'm going to knock it down. Okay, it's ready to come out. And just pull it out in the trash. So now the choke plates are out. I'm going to put the carburetor in the vise with rubber jaws. We want to be gentle with this carburetor. It's fragile. So now it's held tight in the rubber jaws. And we're going to come in here and we're going to drill a hole in this brass fitting. We want to remove this brass plug. And you feel it go through. Okay, so now I have my hole drilled in the brass plug. I'm going to take my easy out, stick it in the hole, and set it with the hammer. You turn this counterclockwise with a bit of pressure down into it and you feel it break free. And I kind of lift on the wrench. And there it is. Flip the carburetor over. Carefully put it back in the vise. Turn and lift. And you're going to do this to all 4 plugs. Everything drilled out. We have all the grinding and drilling done. We're going to take carb cleaner. We're going to spray out the throat of the carburetor. Spray out the holes where the plugs were. Both sides. And I'm going to take the air and blow it all out. Now it's ready to go to the bench. We're going to pull the stock adjustment screws out. We'll put the T-handles in and we'll jet them. We're going to take a flathead screwdriver, and you can look in and see the slot, and they come out counterclockwise. You drop the jet on the bench. We're going to remove the spring, the O-ring, and this is going to go back on your T-handle. Okay? Now before we go and put our new jet in, we're going to take some contact cleaner on a Q-tip, and we're going to make sure there's no debris or brass shavings inside the carburetor. See, there's little bits that come out sometimes. Okay, so we've removed the spring, the washer, and the O-ring off the stock adjustment screw. Okay, we're ready to install the new adjustment screw. It's very important that you notice the threads are coarse on the high speed and they're fine on the low speed. So it's very obvious which one's what. You make sure you don't mix these up and put the wrong one in the wrong hole. So we're going to take a high speed T-handle. We're going to put our spring on. We're going to put the washer and the O-ring back on. Our carburetor is nice and clean. And we're going to install the T-handle. Now we're going to thread this in until it bottoms out. Okay, bottomed out. We're going to open it up one turn. One turn. Now we're going to do our low speed on the other side. Fine thread, low speed, spring goes on first, washer, O-ring. Make sure everything's nice and clean. Thread the O-ring down. Make sure it seats on the washer and it's ready to go back in. Same thing here, we're going to thread it in all the way until it bottoms out. So now our low speed's in, all the way bottomed out. We're going to open it up a turn and a quarter. Half, 1 1/4. The reason we're setting this one up to 1 1/4 and 1 turn, this is what works with the jetting specs that we're using here today. Now this setup is going to work for a bone stock ski, 701, no mods. It's going to help the ski start up easier and carburate properly. Whether you're riding full speed on the track and you're lifting on the throttle and you're grabbing a handful, it's going to carburate properly. It's also going to work if you have a B-pipe. And all we're going to change in here is the high-speed jets. We're going to go from a 130, which is stock, to a 135. And we're going to change the pop-off pressure. We're going to put 80 gram springs. Okay? Your carburetors come stock with 1.5 needle end seats and 115 springs, very high pop-off. So by changing these springs to 80 gram, we're going to lower the pop-off, which is going to make the ski start better and carburate properly. Okay, so your jets are in this side of the carburetor, not this side. This side, not this side. So you're going to take these 4 Phillips out on each carburetor. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do now is we're going to take this plate off. Our jets are underneath here. Now these Phillips head screws are very tight from the factory. Be careful not to strip these. I generally use an impact screwdriver that you hit with a hammer to loosen these up. The impact gun can work also, but be very careful that you don't strip these Phillips head screws. We're going to loosen up the arm for the needle and seat because we're going to change the spring. Just be careful you don't lose all the parts. Carefully take the arm out and a little pin in it. We're going to take the spring out. We're not going to be reusing those. And I'm going to knock this plate out. Now you can see your jets. This is your pilot jet. This is your main jet. The pilot jet is a 70. We're going to leave that there. The main is a 130, which we're going to change to a 135. You can see it slotted, so you just put a flat blade screwdriver in there and remove it. Okay, there's the main jet. Now it says right on top of it what size it is. This is a 130, 130. We're going to get our 135s, double check the numbers are correct, drop it in, tighten it up. These are older carburetors. They're off a 2015 Superjet. They're not perfect conditions. This is not a brand new ski. It does have time on it, so they're not perfect. We'll clean these up and make it all nice before we put them back together. Main thing when you're working on carburetors is cleanliness. It doesn't hurt to just wipe the blade of your screwdriver with a towel before you put your jets back in or whatever you're working on. Try to keep it clean. We're going to go ahead and put this plate back in. We're going to put our 80-gram spring back in. We're going to drop the needle back in. And the arm and the pin. Now you make sure that that little dot goes over the spring. Carefully hold it in place and tighten up the screw. It's nice and snug. I like to test it and make sure the needle and seat's working properly. Now you're going to tighten up your plate. And we're going to clean it a little bit and put it back together. Okay, nice and clean. Ready to go back together. Okay, I like to grease the screws before I put it back together. Just a dab of waterproof grease on each one. I like to use the flat blade for the final, just to snug them up. Okay, now our carburetors have T-handle screws so we can tune them. We've put a bigger main jet, we've lowered the pop-off pressure. One last thing I'd like to show you guys is if we take this spring off, this is on the center linkage. If we remove this spring, it's going to be much easier to pull on the throttle. And it can make your ski feel more snappy. So I'm going to pull this linkage off. Remove the spring and put the linkage back on. Okay, we're going to tighten it up. The half moon throttle cable holder, and we're going to install a throttle wheel. This gives us more versatility where we want to put our throttle cable. You can install your throttle cable wherever you want. So it just gives you a little bit more adjustment on your throttle lever, on the carbs with your throttle cable. Makes it so you can just dial things in and make it super sweet. So we're going to remove this half moon. Super simple, just pops right off. This is threaded. Thread it on nice and snug. And the lock washer doesn't fit anymore, so we just use the nut now. Because this is threaded, no big deal. And we're going to snug it up. Okay, done deal. So now our carbs are ready to go back together. We're going to set the linkage. Okay, because we've removed the choke plates, now we have holes in each side of the carburetor. I use Plexus and plug these holes. This setup does not need a primer. Some guys who ride in the ocean like a primer. If they get a little bit of water in their ski, they can prime it and give it extra fuel. So that's an option. If you want to install a primer kit, you can put the brass fittings with the barb on it to put your primer here. The one last part is we're going to put air filter adapters or stacks. I prefer the stacks. It's like a vortex and it helps pull more air. Okay, so we're going to put our stacks on and we're going to put some aftermarket air filters on. This is kind of the icing on the cake. It's going to let your ski breathe, flow more air, and rip. So if you don't feel comfortable with any of this stuff, feel free to take your carburetors off, throw them in a box, and ship them to us. We'll dial them in for you and send them back. So these carbs are ready to go back in the ski, ready to go to the water for some fine tuning. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to TC FREERIDE, give us a shout, like the video, subscribe. Thanks guys for watching.